As the guests erupted in laughter at the groom's father's humble gift, no one expected what came next, a revelation so powerful it left even the most arrogant among them speechless. This is a story of love, resilience, and a quiet strength that would change everything. At first glance, Ryan and Sophia's engagement dinner seemed like a picture-perfect evening, a celebration of love hosted in the grandeur of Sophia's family estate. The chandeliers sparkled, the table was set with fine china, and the laughter of well-dressed guests filled the air. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Sophia's parents, Richard and Evelyn, had always looked down on Ryan. To them, he was just a man from a working-class family, raised by his widowed father, Daniel, a janitor. They never hesitated to remind him of his place in subtle, cutting ways. Tonight, with all eyes on Daniel, their disdain was about to spill over. The dinner was supposed to unite the families, but it quickly became a battleground. Whispered judgments rippled through the crowd as Daniel entered the room in his simple, well-worn suit. The bride's father couldn't resist a smirk, and her mother's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted in thinly veiled disapproval. "I wonder what kind of gift a janitor could bring to a gathering like this," one guest murmured, triggering polite chuckles. But Daniel stood tall, his weathered hands steady and his quiet dignity unshaken. He had faced worse before, and tonight wasn't about proving himself. It was about celebrating his son's future. Still, no one, not even Ryan, could have predicted how the night would unfold. When Daniel finally stepped forward to present his gift, the room went silent. The modest brown paper wrapping looked almost out of place among the gleaming, ribbon-adorned boxes on the gift table. Richard's smirk widened. "This should be interesting," he said under his breath. But what happened next would change everything, not just for Ryan and Sophia, but for everyone in the room. By the end of the night, alliances would shift, reputations would crumble, and a father's unwavering strength would become the most unforgettable moment of the evening. The sun was setting over the sprawling estate, casting a warm golden glow on the perfectly manicured gardens as luxury cars lined the driveway. Inside, the engagement dinner was in full swing. The clinking of crystal glasses and the hum of polite conversation filled the air, creating an atmosphere of wealth and exclusivity. For Ryan, however, the grandeur only heightened the weight pressing down on him. This was the world Sophia had grown up in, a world where appearances mattered more than intentions, where judgment often arrived before understanding. Ryan adjusted his tie nervously, glancing at his father, Daniel, who sat quietly beside him. Daniel, a man of few words but unshakable presence, had spent his life working tirelessly to raise his son after his wife's untimely death. Tonight, dressed in his carefully pressed but modest suit, Daniel's hands rested on his lap, his weathered fingers a testament to decades of hard work. Sophia, radiant as always, entered the room, her hand brushing lightly against Ryan's arm in reassurance. She could sense his tension. She felt it too. She loved Ryan fiercely, but she couldn't deny the chasm between their families. Her parents, Richard and Evelyn, were polite in public but had made it clear in private that they viewed Ryan, and especially Daniel, as unworthy of their world. Their approval, Sophia knew, would be a battle not easily won. As Richard raised his glass to toast the happy couple, the tension in the room seemed to thicken. His words, though eloquent, carried a subtle edge. "To love," he declared, "and to the merging of two very different worlds. May we find common ground despite our contrasting paths." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Evelyn chimed in, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "And to Ryan's father, Daniel, it's not every day we have the chance to meet someone with such a grounded perspective on life." A ripple of laughter followed, light but unmistakably condescending. Ryan clenched his jaw, his eyes darting to his father, but Daniel remained composed, his face unreadable, his dignity intact. Years of enduring the subtle and not-so-subtle judgments of others had taught him how to weather these moments without flinching. He knew tonight wasn't about him. It was about Ryan and Sophia. As the evening unfolded, the divide between the two families became increasingly apparent. Guests whispered behind raised glasses, their glances lingering on Daniel's plain attire or the humble car he had arrived in. Sophia's attempts to bridge the gap between the families were met with smiles that felt more like barriers than invitations. Ryan's frustration simmered beneath the surface, his love for Sophia clashing with his growing resentment for the way her parents treated his father. Before I continue with the events that would leave this entire room stunned, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever been judged unfairly or stood up for someone you love, hit that like button, because what happens next will remind you of the strength in standing tall against prejudice. The evening moved forward, but not without tension. When dessert was served, Richard leaned toward Daniel with a smirk. "So, Daniel," he began, "Ryan must be so proud of how hard you've worked for him. Tell me, how do you find the time for hobbies when you're keeping things spotless?" The room quieted just enough for the comment to hang in the air, the sharp edges impossible to miss. Ryan's fists tightened under the table, but Daniel simply looked Richard in the eye, his voice calm and steady. "Hard work is its own reward," he replied. "And my greatest hobby has always been ensuring my son's success. I'd say I've done quite well." The room fell silent, the weight of his words lingering even as Richard forced a tight-lipped smile. For a moment, it seemed the tide had turned. But this was only the beginning of a night no one would ever forget. The engagement dinner continued, the chatter of guests weaving through the soft strains of a live string quartet. The air was rich with the aroma of gourmet dishes served on pristine white plates, every detail meticulously curated to impress. Yet, for Ryan and Daniel, the grandeur of the evening only served to underline the glaring divide between the two families. Richard, standing tall at the head of the table, was in his element. His voice carried across the room as he regaled the guests with tales of his family's successes, subtly underscoring their wealth and social standing. Evelyn, seated beside him, chimed in at just the right moments, her practiced smiles and knowing glances keeping the room in sync with their narrative. Meanwhile, Daniel remained quietly composed, his presence both unassuming and dignified. He engaged politely with the few guests who dared to approach him, answering their probing questions with honesty and grace. But the whispers continued, spreading like wildfire among those who lingered at a safe distance. "A janitor. Can you imagine?" one woman murmured behind her jeweled hand. "I wonder if he even knows which fork to use," another added with a soft laugh. Ryan heard every word, his jaw tightening as he tried to focus on Sophia's reassuring smile. She squeezed his hand under the table, a silent reminder that she was with him, no matter what. But even Sophia couldn't ignore the palpable tension in the room. When the first course was cleared, Richard rose again, tapping his glass for attention. The room hushed as he gestured toward Daniel. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone smooth, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a very special guest tonight, Daniel, Ryan's father. It's no small feat raising a son on your own, and we all admire the dedication it must have taken. Truly inspiring." The words might have sounded genuine to the untrained ear, but Ryan recognized the undercurrent of patronizing pity. Daniel, however, nodded graciously. "Thank you, Richard," he said simply, his voice steady. "Raising Ryan has been the honor of my life." Not satisfied with the response, Richard pressed on. "And what is it you do again, Daniel? Something about custodial work, was it?" The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of every guest in the room. Evelyn's lips curled into a tight smile as she added, "It's wonderful how hard you've worked to support Ryan. Truly admirable." Daniel straightened in his chair, meeting their gazes without flinching. "Yes, I'm a janitor," he replied calmly. "It's honest work, and it allowed me to provide for my son and teach him the values of integrity and perseverance." I'm proud of what I've accomplished. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then came the polite applause, the kind that felt more obligatory than genuine. Richard, however, wasn't ready to let the moment go. Of course, he said, chuckling lightly. But surely you've considered other opportunities. Daniel, a man of your composure seems capable of so much more. Ryan could feel the tension in his chest tightening like a coiled spring. He opened his mouth to speak, but Daniel's hand on his arm stopped him. Daniel turned back to Richard, his voice calm but firm. I've always believed that success isn't measured by titles or wealth, but by the kind of person you are when no one's looking. By that measure, I've been very successful. The quiet power of his words seemed to disarm the room. Even some of the guests who had whispered behind his back now looked away, their faces tinged with discomfort. Sophia, sitting beside Ryan, smiled softly, her admiration for Daniel clear in her eyes. But Richard, unwilling to relinquish control of the narrative, forced another laugh. Well said, Daniel, well said. But surely, a man with your perspective has something extraordinary planned for tonight. After all, an engagement dinner is about celebrating, isn't it? Perhaps a toast? Or a gift? The attention of the room shifted sharply to Daniel. Whispers swirled again, curiosity mingling with judgment. Ryan felt his stomach twist as he glanced at his father. He knew Richard's words were meant to corner him, to make him feel small in front of an audience that thrived on appearances. But Daniel didn't falter. He leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. A gift, yes, he said softly. I do have something for Ryan and Sophia, but I believe the right moment for it hasn't come yet. The intrigue in the room deepened. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard by Daniel's composed response. Evelyn exchanged a glance with her husband, her expression one of thinly veiled skepticism. The dinner continued, but the undercurrent of tension remained. Guests whispered and speculated about the mysterious gift, their words blending with the gentle clinking of silverware. Ryan, despite his frustration, felt a flicker of pride as he watched his father hold his ground with grace. Sophia leaned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. Your dad is incredible, she said, her eyes shining with admiration. Ryan nodded, his voice tight with emotion. He's the strongest man I know. Little did they know, the moment Daniel had been waiting for was fast approaching. And when it came, it would leave everyone in the room speechless. The stars glittered against the dark velvet sky as Ryan stepped out onto the terrace, the crisp night air offering a welcome contrast to the stifling tension inside. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. Moments later, the sound of steady footsteps drew his attention. Daniel appeared, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the chandelier spilling through the glass doors. Ryan sighed, leaning against the stone railing. I don't know how you do it, Dad, he said, his voice tight. How you sit there and let them talk to you like that. It's not right. Daniel approached him slowly, his hands resting lightly on the rail. It's not about letting them, son, he replied, his tone calm and measured. It's about choosing what's worth fighting for. Tonight isn't about me. It's about you and Sophia. I won't let their words ruin what's supposed to be one of the happiest nights of your life. Ryan clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. But it's not just tonight, is it? They've been judging us from the start. Judging you, like they're better than us just because they have money. Daniel turned to face his son, his expression one of quiet strength. Ryan, people will always judge. It's human nature. What matters is how we respond. Do we stoop to their level? Or do we show them what real character looks like? Ryan shook his head, frustration spilling over. I just hate seeing them treat you like this. After everything you've done for me, everything you've sacrificed, they have no right to look down on you. A soft smile touched Daniel's lips as he placed a steady hand on Ryan's shoulder. Sacrifice isn't a burden, Ryan. It's a choice. I chose to work hard so you could have opportunities one didn't. And look at you now. You're the man I always hoped you'd become. That's worth more than any insult they can throw my way." Ryan's eyes glistened under the faint light. "But it's not fair. You deserve respect. You've earned it." Daniel's gaze softened, his voice steady. "Respect isn't something you take. It's something you earn, and not just from others, but from yourself. I don't need their approval to know who I am, Ryan. And neither do you." The weight of his father's words settled over Ryan like a calming balm. He looked out at the sprawling gardens below, the flickering lanterns casting shadows over the manicured hedges. "I wish I had your strength," he said quietly. "You do," Daniel replied. "It's in the way you've built a life with Sophia, despite the obstacles. It's in the way you stand by her and by me, even when it's not easy. Strength isn't about shouting the loudest, Ryan. It's about standing firm when it matters most." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the cool breeze carrying the faint hum of conversation from inside. Finally, Ryan turned to his father, his voice filled with determination. "I'll never stop standing up for you, Dad. You've given me everything, and I won't let anyone take that away from us." Daniel nodded, his pride evident in the faint smile that crept across his face. "I know, son, and that's why I'm not worried about tonight or any night after this. You've got a good heart, and that's all that matters." As they turned to head back inside, the tension in Ryan's chest began to ease. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. His father's quiet strength would always be his guide, a compass pointing him toward the kind of man he wanted to be. The moment they re-entered the room, the storm of judgment and whispers awaited them. But Ryan no longer felt the same weight. With his father beside him, he knew they could face anything together. Little did they know, the true test of their resilience was yet to come. And when it did, it would be a moment that no one in that room would ever forget. The dinner was drawing to a close, the soft hum of conversation punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses. Guests were leaning back in their chairs, content from the extravagant meal, but the tension between the two families still hung heavy in the air. Richard, seated at the head of the table, tapped his glass with a polished silver fork, the sharp sound cutting through the low murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with a smile that barely concealed his smugness, "before we conclude this evening, I think it's only fitting that we hear from our esteemed guest, Daniel." His eyes lingered on Daniel, and though his tone was polite, the challenge in his gaze was unmistakable. "Perhaps you'd like to share a few words, or even a token of your affection for the happy couple." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward Daniel. Whispers swirled among the guests like an invisible tide. "Do you think he brought anything? Maybe a broomstick?" Someone snickered under their breath. Ryan's fists clenched under the table, his face taut with anger. Sophia reached for his hand, her touch a silent plea for restraint. Daniel, however, remained unshaken. He rose slowly, his presence commanding the attention of the room despite his humble demeanor. "Thank you, Richard," he began, his voice calm and steady. "It's true, I do have a gift for Ryan and Sophia, but it's not something wrapped in ribbons or adorned with a bow." The whispers grew louder, curiosity sparking among the crowd. Daniel stepped forward, reaching down to pick up a plain, brown paper-wrapped package he had placed discreetly under his chair at the start of the evening. The package was modest, almost out of place among the opulent decor and glittering surroundings. As Daniel set it on the table, Richard's smirk widened. "Ah," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sure this will be interesting." Sophia shot her father a sharp look, but Daniel didn't waver. "This gift," Daniel continued, his hands resting gently on the package, "has been in my family for generations, carries the weight of our history, our struggles, and our triumphs. And tonight, I want to share it with my son and his future wife, as a symbol of what truly matters." The room stilled, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. Ryan exchanged a puzzled glance with Sophia as they stepped forward. Together, they began unwrapping the package, peeling away the layers of paper with careful hands. When the last piece of paper fell away, a collective gasp rippled through the room. The guests leaned forward, their eyes widening in disbelief. It was a painting, an exquisite, vibrant masterpiece that seemed to breathe with life. The brushstrokes danced across the canvas, depicting a serene yet powerful landscape. But it wasn't just the beauty of the painting that captured everyone's attention. It was the name scrawled in the corner. Nathaniel Green. The room erupted in whispers. Is that real? It can't be. Nathaniel Green? His work is worth millions. Even Richard, who had been so composed all evening, faltered. His smirk vanished, replaced by a look of astonishment. This is a Nathaniel Green, he stammered. Daniel nodded, his expression calm. Yes, my grandfather was a close friend of Nathaniel Green. During his early career, when he was struggling to make ends meet, my grandfather supported him, giving him a place to stay and encouraging his work. This painting was a gift, a token of gratitude for the kindness my family showed him. The weight of Daniel's words settled over the room like a wave. The painting was more than just a priceless piece of art. It was a testament to a legacy built on compassion and generosity. Richard's face paled, his usual confidence shaken. You mean to tell me, he began, his voice strained, that you've had something of this value in your possession all this time? Yes, Daniel replied simply. And you chose to remain a janitor? Richard's disbelief was palpable. You could have sold this and lived comfortably, elevated your life. Daniel met Richard's incredulous gaze with quiet resolve. Comfort has never been my goal. Richard, I've never measured my worth by what I own, but by what I've passed down to my son. This painting is a reminder of our history, of the sacrifices made by those who came before us. Selling it would have betrayed everything it stands for. The room was silent, the guests grappling with the enormity of what they had just witnessed. Richard opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came. His power, so rooted in material wealth and status, seemed to crumble in the face of Daniel's unyielding integrity. Ryan stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. Dad, this is incredible, he said, his eyes shining. You've always taught me that values matter more than anything. But tonight you've shown me what that truly means. Sophia placed a hand on Ryan's arm, her own eyes glistening. Thank you, Daniel, she said softly. This is the most meaningful gift anyone could ever give us. Daniel smiled, his gaze shifting between his son and Sophia. This painting is a symbol, he said, not of wealth, but of the strength and resilience that I hope you'll carry into your marriage. Life isn't about what you have, it's about what you build together. As the room sat in stunned silence, Richard's attempts to reassert control over the evening were met with hollow stammers. For the first time, the carefully curated image of superiority he and Evelyn had worked so hard to maintain began to fracture. And as Daniel sat back down, the painting now resting proudly in front of him, the true measure of his strength became undeniable. No one could have imagined how a simple act of generosity, passed down through generations, would bring an entire room to its knees. Yet, in that moment, Daniel had done what no amount of wealth or power could achieve. He had redefined what it meant to leave a legacy. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint clinking of glasses as a few guests nervously sipped their drinks. All eyes were on Richard, whose carefully constructed confidence seemed to falter under the weight of Daniel's quiet dignity. Evelyn, seated beside him, shifted uncomfortably, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the edge of the table as though it might anchor her in the unraveling moment. Richard cleared his throat, his voice strained as he attempted to reclaim control of the evening. Well, Daniel, he began, forcing a tight smile. I must admit, that is quite the story. But let's not forget, this is an engagement dinner, not an art exhibit. The focus should be on Ryan and Sophia. don't you think? Daniel leaned back slightly, his hands resting calmly on the edge of the table. His expression remained steady, but his words carried a weight that silenced the murmurs around the room. You're absolutely right, Richard, he replied. This evening is about Ryan and Sophia. It's about celebrating their love and the values they'll carry forward together. That's exactly why I shared this gift. Richard's smile tightened, the forced politeness barely masking his frustration. Of course, he said, his tone clipped. But let's not ignore the bigger picture. A marriage isn't just about love. It's about stability, reputation, and ensuring both families are compatible. Sophia, who had been silent until now, stiffened in her seat. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Compatible? She repeated, her voice low but sharp. What exactly are you trying to say, Dad? Richard hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her directness. I'm saying, he said carefully, that while love is important, so is practicality. A marriage built on a solid foundation, one that aligns with our family's values, is far more likely to succeed. Sophia's lips parted, but before she could speak, Ryan rose to his feet. His voice was steady, but the fire in his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside him. Enough, he said firmly, his gaze locking with Richard's. You've made your point, Richard. You've spent this entire evening trying to make my father feel small. And now you're trying to make me feel like I'm not good enough for Sophia. But let me tell you something. I'm not here to prove anything to you. The room held its breath, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Ryan took a step closer, his voice unwavering. My father has taught me more about strength, resilience, and integrity than anyone I've ever known. He raised me to believe that a person's worth isn't determined by their wealth or status, but by their actions, their character. And if that doesn't align with your so-called family values, then maybe those values aren't worth as much as you think. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some guests nodding in agreement while others exchanged uneasy glances. Evelyn opened her mouth as if to interject, but Sophia's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Ryan's right, she said, rising to stand beside him. Her voice was firm, her expression resolute. I've spent my entire life trying to live up to your expectations, trying to fit into the mold you've created for me. But tonight, I see things clearly. What matters isn't your approval or anyone else's. What matters is that I've found someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I represent. Richard's face darkened, his composure slipping further. Sophia, you don't understand. No, Dad. She interrupted, her voice rising slightly. You don't understand. You've spent this entire evening trying to undermine the man I love and the father who raised him. But all you've done is show me how small-minded and shallow your world really is. And I'm done being a part of it. The room fell silent once more, the weight of her words settling over the stunned crowd. Richard's face reddened, his jaw tightening as he struggled to form a response. Evelyn, still gripping the edge of the table, cast a pleading look at her daughter. But Sophia didn't waver. Daniel, who had remained seated throughout the exchange, finally rose to his feet. His voice was calm but carried the quiet authority that had defined him all evening. Richard, he said, his gaze steady, I don't expect you to understand my choices or my values. But I will say this, what I've passed down to my son is worth more than any material possession. It's a legacy of resilience, of kindness, of knowing that true strength doesn't come from what you have, but from what you give. He turned to Ryan and Sophia, his expression softening. And I see that legacy in both of you, the love you share, the way you stand together. It's everything I could have hoped for. Sophia's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Daniel. Ryan joined them, his hand resting on his father's shoulder in a gesture of quiet solidarity. The applause started slowly, a hesitant ripple that quickly grew into a wave of support. Guests who had spent the evening whispering judgments now clapped openly. their expressions a mix of admiration and shame. Even those who had aligned themselves with Richard's worldview seemed to recognize the power of what had just unfolded. Richard and Evelyn remained seated, their expressions frozen in disbelief. For the first time, they were no longer in control of the narrative. The room had shifted, and with it, the very foundation of their influence. As the applause subsided, Daniel turned to Ryan and Sophia, his voice soft but resolute. "This is your moment," he said. "Don't let anyone take it from you." With that, the three of them left the table, walking toward the door as the room watched in stunned silence. It wasn't a retreat, it was a declaration, a quiet yet powerful statement of what truly mattered. And as they stepped into the cool night air, leaving behind the glittering chandeliers and hollow judgments, the strength of their bond shone brighter than ever. The night air wrapped around them like a gentle embrace as Ryan, Sophia, and Daniel stepped outside. The distant hum of laughter and music from the engagement dinner faded behind them, replaced by the soothing rustle of leaves in the estate's manicured gardens. For the first time that evening, Ryan felt like he could breathe again. Sophia slipped her hand into Ryan's, her touch warm and reassuring. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice tinged with a mix of anger and sadness. "I never wanted tonight to turn out like this." Ryan stopped, turning to face her. "You don't have to apologize," he said firmly. "You stood up for us, for what matters. That's all I could ever ask for." Daniel, standing a few steps away, gave them both a small smile. "You both did something tonight that takes real courage," he said. "You chose each other, even when it meant standing against the people closest to you. That's not easy, but it's what love is all about." Sophia blinked back tears, her grip on Ryan's hand tightening. "I just hope they'll understand someday. My parents, they've built their lives on status and appearances. But maybe, just maybe, tonight showed them there's more to life than that." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "People don't change overnight, Sophia, but what you did tonight planted a seed. Whether they choose to nurture it is up to them. But you've shown them a different path. That's all you can do." They walked together in silence for a few moments, the cool night air filled with the distant chirping of crickets. The weight of the evening began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of resolve. "I don't regret anything," Ryan said suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Not a single word, not a single choice. We're starting a new chapter, and I want it to be ours, built on love, not judgment." Sophia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Ours?" she echoed, the word carrying a promise she intended to keep. Daniel stopped at the edge of the garden path, turning to face them. "You two have everything you need to build something beautiful," he said. "You have love, respect, and a shared vision for your future. That's more valuable than any wealth or status. Hold on to that, and you'll be just fine." Ryan stepped forward, pulling his father into a firm embrace. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For teaching me what it means to be a man. For showing me how to stand tall, even when it's hard. I wouldn't be here without you." Daniel's voice was steady but warm. "You don't owe me any thanks, Ryan. Seeing the man you've become is thanks enough. Just promise me one thing, always stay true to who you are, no matter what." "I promise," Ryan said, stepping back to meet his father's eyes. Sophia joined them, her hand resting on Daniel's arm. "You've given us more than just a gift tonight," she said. "You've given us an example to live by. That means everything to me." Daniel smiled, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "Then my work here is done," he said lightly, though his voice carried the depth of a father's love. As they left the estate behind, their steps in sync and their hearts aligned, the world seemed to expand before them. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. Inside, the dinner continued, though the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The guests who had once whispered judgments now whispered questions, their curiosity tinged with shame and admiration. Richard and Evelyn remained seated, their expressions unreadable, the weight of the evening settling heavily on their shoulders. "Do you think we've lost her?" Evelyn asked softly, her voice trembling. Richard didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway where Sophia had walked out. Finally, he sighed, his voice low and uncertain. "I don't know, but maybe we needed to lose this battle to realize what's really at stake." The night moved on, but for Ryan, Sophia, and Daniel, it marked the beginning of something new, as they walked toward a life built on love, dignity, and resilience. The echoes of the evening faded behind them. They weren't walking away, they were walking forward, together, into a future they would create on their own terms. And in the quiet strength of that moment, they knew they had already won. A year had passed since that unforgettable night, but its echoes still lingered, shaping the lives of everyone involved. Ryan and Sophia now lived in a cozy home on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the grandeur of Sophia's childhood estate, yet filled with warmth and love. Their days were simple but meaningful, built on shared dreams and a foundation of trust that no external judgment could shake. The centerpiece of their living room was the painting, a masterpiece by Nathaniel Green, mounted with care above the fireplace. It wasn't just art, it was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of where they came from and the values they were determined to pass on. Sophia stood by the window one morning, cradling a steaming mug of coffee as the sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains. Her gaze rested on Ryan and Daniel outside in the garden, where they were laughing over some minor mishap involving a stubborn lawnmower. The sight warmed her heart. Daniel had become a regular presence in their lives, visiting often to lend a hand or simply share a meal. His calm wisdom and quiet strength continued to guide them, offering reassurance during moments of doubt. Sophia's thoughts drifted to her parents. Their relationship with Richard and Evelyn had grown distant after the engagement dinner, but time, as it often does, began to soften the edges of the rift. There were phone calls now, tentative, polite, but genuine. Evelyn, in particular, seemed to be reevaluating the world she had so tightly clung to, her tone less sharp, her words more reflective. On one such call, Evelyn had admitted, "I didn't understand it before, Sophia, but I think I do now. Love doesn't fit into neat boxes. It's bigger than that." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Later that day, as Sophia set the table for dinner, Ryan entered with Daniel, both carrying the satisfied exhaustion of a day spent working in the sun. "Smells amazing in here," Ryan said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Daniel took a seat, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet contentment. "This feels like home," he said simply, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "It is home," Sophia replied, smiling at him. "Because of you." Over dinner, they spoke of the future, of the family they hoped to build, and the lessons they would pass down. Ryan placed a hand over Sophia's, his gaze steady. "Our children will grow up knowing the values that matter. Strength, integrity, and love, just like you taught me, Dad." Daniel nodded, his heart full. "And they'll build their own legacy, just as you two are doing now." As the evening wore on, laughter filled the room, weaving a tapestry of connection that no outside force could unravel. The past had its place, but it no longer defined them. They were looking forward, together, in a quiet moment later that night. After Daniel had gone to bed in the guest room, Sophia and Ryan sat together on the couch. The painting glowed softly in the dim light, its vibrant strokes a testament to the power of resilience and the beauty of standing firm in one's values. Sophia leaned her head on Ryan's shoulder. "Do you think they'll ever really change?" she asked softly. Ryan wrapped an arm around her, his voice thoughtful. "I think they're trying, in their own way, but even if they don't, it won't change us. We've built something stronger than their judgment, something they can't take away." Sophia nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. "I like where we're headed," she said. "Me too," Ryan replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. And I'm grateful every day that we're on this journey together. As they sat there in the quiet of their home, the weight of the past year seemed to dissolve, replaced by the lightness of hope and the promise of a life lived on their own terms. Their journey wasn't perfect, and challenges would come, but they had learned the most important lesson. True strength doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from love, from standing by the people who matter, and from the courage to write your own story. And as the moonlight illuminated their small but love-filled home, it was clear that their story was just beginning.